Hey there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it is still paranormal, supernatural, whatever month you want to call it, over here on the podcast. So in keeping with our, I swear we're going to do this for the whole year now, in keeping with our tradition that we began in the month of January, we've got one shitty movie and one good movie every month.
Oh yeah, I think that just should be the way.
I think that's the way we should just do it for the entire year. So in January, we talked about The Host, which was Stephenie Meyer's very vague attempt at sci-fi, and everybody all saw how that turned out. And then we talked about The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which in contrast was a much better film, also based on a much better story and novel to begin with, but still, nevertheless.
Heavy.
And I guess we decided to do the same thing this month. So if you listened a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Just Like Heaven, starring Reese Witherspoon and Mark Ruffalo, which I hope that you were as surprised as I was that was based on a book.
I'm so surprised. I find it so funny how surprised you are that it was based on a book.
I never assumed that a mid-2000s rom-com is based on a book. That's weird.
I guess, yeah. A French book, nonetheless.
Yes, a French book as well. I mean, granted, and that's also kind of when you know that they must have made quite massive changes to the plot of the novel, but still. Anyway, this week, thank God, we decided to go in a totally different direction, and this week we are talking about the 2019 film adaptation of Stephen King's Dr. Sleep.
Listen to me. The world's a hungry place. A dark place.
Hi there.
I only met 2 or 3 people like us. They died. When I was a kid, I bumped into these things. I don't know about magic. I always called it The Shining.
The novel was actually published initially in 2013, which is, 40-ish years after the publication of The Shining. If you don't know, Dr. Sleep is a direct sequel to the novel The Shining, which I'm going to double check because it's going to bug me if I don't. The Shining was published in 1977.
And then, the
2013
Kubrick movie came out.
1980, the Stanley Kubrick film came out. Right. So, yes, okay, background context a little bit just to give people like an idea, because not everybody's read these books or seen these movies necessarily. Stephen King wrote The Shining, obviously, back in the 70s when he was pretty heavily into alcohol and drugs, and he had suffered, I believe, a lot of abuse when he was younger per his own father and his own family life. So The Shining, when he wrote the novel, was a way, to a certain extent, for him to put on paper all of the fears that he had around what he could potentially do to his own family. And it was a lot of self-exploration that he used throughout the course of the novel. And it's a much shorter book. Dr. Sleep is sort of him re-examining the entire world that he created throughout the course of that original story. That's it, about 40 years later. Under the totally different lens of someone who is sober and looks at the world very differently and has experienced, so much in that time span. And I think
the world has changed a lot, too.
Yeah, and I think that really, it comes through in the difference in story, because The Shining itself is a lot of it's very psychological and much more based in one's own fear about oneself, and Dr. Sleep is leans a little bit more heavily on the lore itself of the idea of The Shining, which is these sort of telepathic powers, magic abilities of some sort that certain people possess in the world, and how each of them have kind of different abilities and the ways that they adapt to them and cope with them in a more modern society. So they're very different stories. Also, The Shining is not a very long or difficult book to get through. Dr. Sleep is long. Dr. Sleep is a hefty novel. And I do find that I don't know if it's due to a lot of King's like later stuff, like the things that he's been writing maybe since the mid 2000s. I find a lot of them are quite a bit longer. And part of me wonders if it has to do with sobriety to a certain extent. Like he's had more time to kind of like self-exploration.
Like there could be more of like a not psychological, but you know what I mean? Psychology. More psychology involved into it.
I don't know. Yeah, that's it. Like I'm not 100% sure. It's an interesting kind of thought to ponder, but anyway, nevertheless, that's it. The novel she's long. Like it's a hefty brick to get through. I am engaged to someone who is a pretty big Stephen King fan. He's read a lot of the stories. I don't believe that he's finished Dr. Sleep, because I think that especially after you've read The Shining, they're very different types of stories. So when he started getting into Dr. Sleep, the exposition and the build is very lengthy at the beginning, and I think he was like, whoa, I don't think I was like totally prepared for this.
And there's a lot more characters in Dr. Sleep.
There are many more characters
with
that
backstory.
And they're much more important to the plot, whereas like, you know, you've got like a few side people here and there that pop up in The Shining, but they're not really as important. So anyway, 1977 the novel was published. In 1980, Stanley Kubrick, very famous filmmaker, very famously made The Shining into an adaptation, which Stephen King very famously disliked. He did not like the adaptation at all because it leaned so much more into the horror and really didn't touch very much upon the psychological exploration of addiction and trauma and what that does to Jack Torrance, who's, you know, the lead character in the Shining novel, and sort of his own fears about what he's doing to his family. The movie didn't really do that very much. It's much more straight horror. Man moves.
It changed a lot.
Yes,
too.
They did. Yeah. Man moves to very isolated, takes a job as a caretaker over the winter season at a very isolated, very large hotel that's up in the mountains, and it's completely secluded throughout the winter months. Like it gets totally snowed in. You can't get in or out. He takes a job there as a caretaker. He's trying to be a writer. And he's also trying to stay sober because he's been struggling with alcohol addiction quite severely. And basically the hotel itself, the Overlook Hotel, in the novel is kind of, it's kind of a metaphor for his addiction. And the character in the novel struggles much, much more with what he is doing and how he himself is on a downward spiral, whereas you don't really see that very much in the movie. It's much more about the scares themselves and sort of the unsettling atmosphere that's created throughout the course of the movie.
It's also like, you know, when you watch it, like Jack Nicholson is like full on. So Jack Nicholson plays
Jack Torrance in The Shining, yes.
And he's just full on like acting very loopy the whole time.
Yeah,
you know?
it's a lot.
And so like obviously that feeds into like the horror aspect, but you know, knowing the context that it's supposed to be like this man is supposed to be there trying to take care of his kids, his child, his family, that really doesn't come through in that performance.
No, and I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, basically what Stephen King has said since then is something along the lines of like, yes, like it's an incredibly well-made film, and it is.
It is. There's a lot of iconic moments.
Yeah, the cinematography, overall the performances, I personally think Jack Nicholson's a little over the top in this film, but whatever. The performances, Shelley Duvall doesn't get the credit that she deserves for playing Wendy Torrance. She does a really good job. The score, the whole, like all of the visual aspects of it, like it's like a horrific film to watch, but because there's so much lacking in terms of that part of the development, I believe that Stephen King basically referred to it as a beautiful Cadillac with no engine. So it's great to look at, but does it mean? Like, what is the underlying message? And there isn't really one, or at least not as much of one as he had really written initially. So I think he was really disappointed with that. So I know that when it came time to adapt Dr. Sleep, obviously, it was going to be a really different type of film to begin with because the story is so very different from the story of The Shining, and it's so much more involved and there's so much more to it. Like you said, there's so many more characters to explore, all kinds of
very elaborate story.
Very, very much. Yeah, there's so much more to it. It really gave him, it was interesting because it really gave him obviously a chance to explore the idea of The Shining, of these people with these abilities, and perhaps some people who would use their abilities, not use their abilities at all, or people who use them in very different ways from each other, and kind of how that affects people throughout the course of the story. And so when he did that, obviously when it came time to make the film was written and directed by Mike Flanagan, who is becoming pretty pervasive in the whole book to film and screen adaptations. I mean, he's done several adaptations for Netflix: Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, which is not based on a book. But other than that, I think that's the only one. He did The Midnight Club, and also more recently, The Fall of the House of Usher.
And what's that other one there? Something game? Gerald's Game?
Yes, Gerald's Game as well. Yeah. Yes, you're right. That's true, which he also directed for Netflix, which is another Stephen King adaptation as well. So he's done a whole bunch of them. He's also had films, obviously, including Dr. Sleep. I would say Dr. Sleep is probably his biggest theatrical release, but there's a film of his that he made with his wife called Hush from about 6 or 7 years ago that I really enjoy. It's really solid, like home invasion film. I made another movie called Before I Wake. Like, he's had Absentia, like he's had like a bunch. He's been doing this for quite a while. And so when it came time, when he was basically given the task with the idea of like, okay, hey, do you want to write the script for this and direct the film? I think he was like, okay, so I know that there's like the book and there's the movie, and you've got people who love one and people who love the other, and some people who are okay with both.
Yep.
But how do I marry those two things together?
Yeah, because he was essentially so the reason why we're giving so much context here is because it's really important for this movie.
Yeah, it is.
And there's a large portion of this movie that is focused on, after the events of The Shining, what happens to Danny, who is the main character, older version played by Ewan McGregor in Dr. Sleep. But Mike Flanagan was basically faced with, because there were certain details that were changed in the Kubrick movie
film,
that then impacted Dr. Sleep as like a book, he had to find a way of marrying the Kubrick and the King version of The Shining so that it could feed into Dr. Sleep, the movie.
Yeah, and it came through like really brilliantly. Yep. This is an incredibly well-made film.
It's fantastic.
It's very, like, from start to finish, the script, the casting, the visuals in this film are beautiful to look at. The acting is wonderful. Everybody is excellent, and that includes characters or actors who had to step into the shoes of original characters from the Stanley Kubrick film and from the original story, of course, and portray these characters not as just a caricature portrayal of how the actor did it in the original film, but kind of make them feel like a person as well in this new context of this new story that they're telling, because there are quite a few flashbacks. So, Dr. Sleep currently has a rating of 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb and 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's not high enough.
No.
The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 89%, which makes a lot more sense to me. So buckle up, everybody. This movie's long. I'm sorry, it's 2.5 hours long.
Yep. Get cozy. And there's just like a lot in this
There's so
movie,
much plot that it's difficult not to touch on a lot of it. Yeah. So, yes, the Dr. Sleep takes place also about 40-odd years after the events of The Shining. It follows Dan Torrance, who's Jack Torrance's son, who is very young, like 5 or 6, I think, in the original story, and him dealing with the aftermath of everything that happened in The Shining at the Overlook Hotel with his parents, how his father basically went crazy, and sort of how he's dealt with that later. We do start with quite a few flashbacks with Danny and his mom, Wendy Torrance. After the events of the original story, they moved to Florida, the two of them together, to start over. And Danny has the shine, which is like this ability. And he had quite a bit of it. And he has quite a bit of it in The Shining, too. They just don't touch on it quite as much. But in the novel, Danny talks to someone named Tony, who is like this person that he sees when he looks in the mirror and stuff. And they do this thing that I hate in the Stanley Kubrick movie where he stands in front of the mirror and he goes, red rum, like with his finger.
Yeah.
And it's red rum is murder backwards, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. And it's a really famous, iconic word that you see in The Shining, like often. Because it's mirrored, so it's backwards. And so Tony keeps on like pointing this out to him. Tony is his shine, basically. Tony isn't an actual person. He's basically like an older version of Danny who's trying to warn him about everything that's going to happen at the Overlook, and it is everything that does happen. So that's it. So it's a little ways after Jack Torrance dies at the Overlook, and Wendy and Danny are living together. He hasn't spoken a word since they left the hotel, and he's dealing with still seeing the ghosts from the hotel, the entities from the hotel that have like followed him out of there. And he learns when he's young, he's able to speak to Dick Halloran, who is a character from the novel and from the film, the first one, who works at the Overlook Hotel, meets him, and also has a shine.
Yeah.
And he... so that's it. So they had to change this a little bit too. Dick is alive technically after the Shining novel. And at the beginning of the Dr. Sleep book, he is also alive. That character does not die. However, in Stanley Kubrick's film, he does die. He dies the minute he comes back to the Overlook to try and help Danny and Wendy, which is very annoying. By the way, I don't like that. I remember being really annoyed with that when I watched the movie because I was like, this character is important, and they kill him the minute he walks back in.
Yeah. It's
stupid. Also, they kill the only person of color who's in the movie. But anyway, and that character does not die in the book. So the way that they changed things for the Dr. Sleep film is that they just had Dick come back
as a ghost. Because The Shining, for everybody, manifests differently.
Yes,
so
but
for Danny, he can see
ghosts quite a lot, and a lot of them can.
Yeah.
But I find his is like his ability is very strongly towards that like sort of aspect of things of like seeing ghosts, seeing dead people a lot. And Dick kind of, gives him a bit of a pep talk and tells him, like, you're going to have to find a way to compartmentalize this, like, to work through this. And so his way to do that is that he does this thing in his mind where he's got, like, mind boxes. And so every time one of the ghosts shows up to try to do something to him, he locks them away in one of these boxes, and that's kind of like partially how he's coped. And the other way that he copes, as we see, which when we move ahead by like 35 years, is alcohol.
He drinks. He's
so much.
His dad.
Unfortunately, yes. So the whole beginning of the story really sees Danny struggling with...
Oh, yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah.
Dan struggling with a lot of his addiction issues. He has a one-night stand with this woman and wakes up the next morning and is like, ugh. And then she seems to have taken some of his money, so he like takes money out of her wallet, sees that there is a toddler
hungry.
Yeah, meanwhile she's like lying in her own puke in the bed.
When I watched this, I wasn't sure if that signified that she was dead.
I don't think
from like an overdose.
I don't think you're supposed to know because he can't tell, as far as I know. Like when he wakes up, I think he just thinks that she's passed out.
Right, and like also he could see ghosts. Right.
Yes.
So So I took it when I first saw this. I took it that she was dead.
Right.
And which made the scene that much more horrible.
Yeah, you're like, oh my god, he's leaving.
And he's leaving the toddler there, who's hungry already, and he's taking the money and stuff. Like, I just thought it was horrible.
Yeah. No, for sure, I get that. So basically, he takes off. He like leaves the baby, even though Dick's ghost does appear, and he's like, you could at least leave the money there. But he's so deep into his own addiction and his own problems that he's not paying attention to anything. He's not noticing anything, right? So we're getting like, his whole situation, his whole backstory, and he does wind up going to a small town in New Hampshire. He winds up there and he meets this guy in the middle of town. They have this funny they have a miniature version of their town square that like the kids have built.
Be like important.
No, somehow. It's just cute. It's called Teeny Town, and I thought it was funny. It's just funny where he meets this guy in town named Billy, who's the best fucking friend anybody could ask
guy
for.
Ever.
What a good person. Obviously, very clearly also sees, as a former addict, sees an addict and is like, I should help this person. Like, he seems like he needs help. Helps him get room and board, brings him to an AA meeting when he's, about to drink and he needs help with something, and then helps him start to work on his journey towards recovery and helps him get a job and everything. Like, they kind of work through. There's a cool scene because Danny tries not to use his shine very often because I feel weird calling him Danny when he's like a 45-year-old man. Dan tries to use he tries not to use his shine, and partially the alcohol is partially to dull the effects of it because he doesn't want to deal with it.
Well, because it's always like there's always some after effect that he has to deal with. Either
Exactly.
he has to lock the ghost in a box because they're haunting him,
Yeah.
or they're like trying to make him better and he doesn't want that.
And he's
either.
like, no, and it's like Dick, and he's like, go away, like I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So he goes to this AA meeting and he meets the man who's like, he's a doctor and he works, I think, at one of the local like hospices or something, who he speaks to, you know, and he's, you know, they like chat with each other a little bit. I think that character is actually quite a bit bigger in the novel than he is in the movie. You only see him in a couple of scenes in the film. Played by Bruce Greenwood, who is also just in The Fall of the House of Usher. He played Roderick Usher. Mike Flanagan is very Tim Burton coded in that he's got his group of actors who follow him.
They do such a good
everywhere,
job.
But everybody's so fantastic that it doesn't matter.
It's good.
It's fine. Like his wife is in a lot of his stuff. Kate Siegel, she's in like a lot of his different shows and everything. And there's like a whole group of people, even some of the people who have really small parts in this film are in other stuff of his, are in like The Haunting of Hill House.
And they have much bigger roles.
And they have bigger roles. I noticed when on this watch of this, because it's only the second time I've watched the movie, I noticed on this watch of this, one of the people who you see who's one of the other members of this group called the True Knot, who are also a bunch of people who have the shine, but they're like the bad guys. The villain characters, basically. I saw this girl, she has like no lines. You barely see her. She's one of the female characters that are part of that group. I was like, she looks familiar. And then I realized that she was just in The Fall of the House of Usher and she played Roderick's wife when he's younger. And I was like, oh shit, that's that person. You know, that's it. They all like, all of them pop up over and over and over again. One of the guys in it, the like bigger, like burly guy, was in The Fall of the House of Usher as the caretaker, and he was also in Midnight Mass as the drunk guy in town who accidentally shot that girl like years ago. Like all of them, like they all come back in a bunch of other stuff.
There's something very cozy about like working that way.
And
like,
it also, I like to think that
Burton does it so well, you know, and like now it's like we've got this like kind of newer like
version
group.
of that.
Yeah, version.
I like to think to an extent it really speaks a lot to like how comfortable his sets are and that people really like to work with him.
What a good director he is.
That's it, exactly. And that he creates like a good atmosphere for like a working space for people where they feel safe and they want to go back and work with him over and over again. So that seems nice. So anyway, he meets this doctor, and he doesn't want to use his shine, but I think again he's sobering up slowly but surely, and so it manifests itself anyway. So he goes up to the doctor and he's like, because the guy's rubbing his wrist like he's thinking about something, and he turns to leave, and Dan walks over to him and he's like, Doc, which is funny because everybody calls Dan Doc. His mom's been calling him that since he was a kid. His parents called him that in The Shining as well. And he's like, your watch, like you're thinking about your watch. You were at the hospital, you were doing this, you were thinking about the kid with whatever disease that he can't pronounce the name properly. You washed your hands and you left it on top of the soap dispenser. And the doctor's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So they meet afterward in a scene that very much mimics a scene at the beginning of The Shining in an office at the hospital, I think.
Oh, yes.
And that's how Dan gets his job working. And I don't think it's in, I think it's an old
palliative care.
It might be palliative care or in a hospice of some sort.
Because it is with the elderly.
Yes. Yeah. And they have a cat, which you see that a lot in palliative care as well. A lot of old folks' homes, like retirement complexes, things like that. A lot of them have animals, particularly
like
cats.
Yeah.
Because they keep the residents company, and it's like a nice thing. So so he works there as like a janitor overnight. Like he does cleaning and stuff, and gets like a steady job there and keeps sober. And he starts to slowly but surely, I think, accept and use his shine a little bit more. So there's a cat, the cat in the palliative care unit named Azrael, which is also named after like the angel of death was Azrael, right? So who seems to have an interesting sixth sense of sorts, where he always knows when one of the residents is going to pass away. Basically, like he always seems to be aware. He goes into their room and he will climb onto the bed and lie with them. And there's a conversation. Dan follows him into a man's room one night, and the man's like, "Oh, the cat's here. I guess it's my time to go." And he's like, "Oh no, I'm sure it's fine." He's like, "No, it's like an urban legend that they have in the unit that Azzy always knows when someone's going to go when it's their time." And he uses his So Dan, to comfort the man, because he's a little bit nervous, and that's totally understandable. I can't even imagine. He uses his shine to speak to him telepathically and just tell him it's good. It's fine. You won't feel anything. It's just like going to sleep. Yeah. And so the man says, you're like a doctor. He's like, oh no, I'm not a doctor. He's like, yeah, you are. Dr. Sleep. And that's where the name
they start calling
of
him
the
Dr.
book comes
Sleep
from.
on the board.
Yeah.
And then it kind of fast forwards, doesn't it? Like
8 years. We pop forward from, because I think it was 2011, we pop forward to 2019. So the year that the film takes place in, really.
And like during all this time, like Dan is doing a lot better. Like he's kept his job. He's kept sober. Yeah. His best friend ever, Billy, is still in his life. Best friend ever. And you'll know why we're saying that. Yeah, and so then it gets to the point of like when the like actual action starts.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of like give like a through line of what Dan's been dealing with, but there are other things interspersed with it. One of the things that happens is that 5 or 6 years prior, he telepathically is contacted by a little girl named Abra Stone.
Abra.
Who at the time she's like 6, I think, at the beginning, and they live in the same state, and I think that she can sense him because he stays in like a little boarding house. He lives in like an apartment, and there's a blackboard wall. He walks in one day after a shift, and she's just written hello on the blackboard with a little smiley face. Yeah, and he's like. And I love that there's no overreaction at all. He's like, oh, okay, there's another one around here. And so he writes hello back, and they seem to pen pal it for a while.
Yeah, like they become like friends.
It's
like there's
really
like
cute.
An understanding that they become friends, and there's like a scene where Abra is at her birthday party, like just to show you how strong her shine is.
She's ridiculous.
There's a magician who's there, or a clown or something, who puts a spoon on his nose.
It's a magician, yeah, and she keeps going, I can do that.
I can do that.
And he's like, that's nice, honey. And then later her parents come into the kitchen, and she's taken all of the cutlery out of the drawers, and all the forks and knives are on the floor, but the spoons are all stuck to the ceiling.
Yeah. And she's all proud of herself because she's like, see, I can do it. Yeah.
But then they don't react well. They're like, ugh, because they don't know how to react. And she's like, oh, and you see her, she gets sad, and then she drops all of them. And when she does that, this is back when Dan is still like an alcoholic at that time and traveling. The strength of what she does is so strong that it jolts him awake where he's asleep on a bus randomly. And the other character, who is like our main villain, who I haven't mentioned yet, Rose the Hat, she feels it as well. So
she's awesome.
Yeah. So this group of villains basically in this film, they're called the True Knot. And the way that the True Knot functions is that they all have a different kind of shine, and they can all do different things with it. But what they choose to do is, instead of just, living together, living their lives just one life over and functioning properly, they seek out people with shine, they kill them, and they eat the shine, basically. Like they inhale, like it looks like steam. They call it steam.
They call it steam.
They inhale it, they consume it, and in doing so, that keeps them young for a long time because they're like energy vampires, basically. They're absorbing.
It very much reminded me of the witches from Stardust, who have to like kill a star and like eat a star. And so these now you put the term energy vampire in my head. Now this group of people in Dr. Sleep, you see them, they like collect steam.
Exactly.
And they put them in canisters and they keep them aside, and that's what keeps them powerful. But
it sustains them. But they need to
keep
doing that. And I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like chances are the more they, like the longer they live, the more they probably have to do this or get stronger steam from people with a really big amount of shine in order for it to sustain them for like a long period of time. So that's it. We've jumped forward 8 years. Dan is still sober. He's working. Things are going like very well and steadily for him, which is nice. Abra is a young teenager now. She's probably like 13 or something, 13, 14. She's played by Kylie Kieran, who is also now becoming a Mike Flanagan regular. She was just in The Fall of the House of Usher as his granddaughter there, Annabelle Lee.
Yep. And these two are having like a pen pal relationship.
A pen pal relationship is so funny. And at the same time, we've jumped forward 8 years, and the True Knot are not doing very well. So Rose is basically, she's the most powerful of all of them, and she's kind of like the leader.
Yeah.
She psychically like will seek out people with steam, and then her lover, whatever you want to call him, Crow Daddy. Yeah, Crow Daddy. Love that.
I know.
They're like a bunch of like bohemian hippies. I really like their boho chic thing that they have going
but
on.
they're also evil. Like you're like
they're also horrible.
Yeah.
It's just that visually you're like, these look like a cool group of people. If you want murdering people, that would be cool.
You might be okay.
Yeah, exactly. So she'll kind of, I think she gets inklings of where people are, and Crow Daddy is like this incredible tracker, and he will follow. He's played by a First Nations person as well, which might be part of that because I believe that the character is First Nations as well.
He could be. I don't know.
He will track the person down. That's like part of his ability, I think, is that he will track that person wherever they will go, find this person, and use different abilities that each of them have in order to kill the person and take their shine, like steal their steam, basically. So they use one of the girls who they pick up early in the story. They call her Snakebite Andy. She's this younger girl. I think she's supposed to be 15. And her ability basically is that she's like a pusher. So if she says something to you, like turn around and walk away from me, like people are compelled to do exactly what she says.
I think like doesn't she say you want to?
Yes.
Like you want to walk away from me.
You want to let me go.
Let me go.
Yeah,
you want to
exactly.
go to sleep now. Yeah.
You want to sleep. You want to do this. Yes, exactly. So she pushes people into doing things from like a psychological standpoint, I guess, like mentally. It's interesting. And technically at the beginning of the story, I don't think she's doing anything all that terrible. She's using it to catch perverts and point out to everybody that they're disgusting.
It's true,
basically, because she meets with like this middle-aged man at a movie theater because he's trying to fuck her.
Ugh. Yeah.
And she's like, don't you want to watch the movie? But he doesn't. And so basically she knocks them out. She takes his wallet because she probably needs money.
Yeah.
Steals his wallet, and then her signature is that she carves something that looks like a snake bite into their face because she's like, you're not going to be able to explain this to anyone. You'll be able to explain the wallet and everything else. But when people want to know what that is and where that came from, you're going to, and her other thing too is that she says to him is every time you look in the mirror, you're going to say, I like little girls. So Rose is fascinated by the idea of having someone like that on her team. So they bring her on board, and I believe in order to indoctrinate them to begin with and get them, it's almost like they're getting them addicted to the steam so that they continue to function this way.
They kind of have to like change their body composition or something.
Yeah, they call it like the turning or whatever, and you inhale the steam because that's not something that someone would regularly do.
And alive.
But it kind of kills your body to an extent. It's very strange. The process of it is very odd. Because that's why she's like, after it happens, Andy passes out, wakes up the next day and is like, am I human? And all Rose says is, do you care?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's fucked up. That would freak me out.
Rose keeps saying, eat well, live long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
eat
she
well.
means eat well with the steam. Like, I think that's kind of her signature to the group. Like, if you like living this way, then you have to help me.
And I think it's how she keeps them too, because she gets them into it, and then it's like, well, you're stuck. You have no choice.
What else are you going to do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we see that when this period of time has passed and they've had a ton of trouble finding more people with shine. Like they're having trouble tracking down more food, and eventually, if they don't, they're not actually immortal. If they don't find more food or more people to consume, they die, which is normal. It's everybody. You starve to death. Eventually, you will die of starvation. It's just that their version looks different than a regular person's would. So
I wonder if there's less and less, and maybe it's in the book. I haven't read the book or anything, but I wonder if there's less people with shine because they're hunting them, right? So it's like
that's part of it too. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I remember I was watching the movie the other day, and I'm sitting there with my fiance. Like, we've both seen it, obviously, and everything. But we're sitting there, and he's like, this is so stupid. He was like there's so many stories like this where this one person or group of people have this idea to do this, and he's like vampires do stuff like that all the time. But it's like eventually, once you kill everyone, what are you gonna do?
There's nothing left. Like you're like, and because they've been around for so long, like one of the characters in this group, they say that he was around during gladiators and
in Rome, and people were afraid of him, and I'm like, holy shit.
If there's 10 or 15 of you in a group, and you're like,
and you wind up being thousands of years old.
Yeah, and you're thousands of years old, and you're seeking out anybody with shine, then you're gonna kill out the population, because evolution's gonna be like, well, that's not a good thing.
I mean, my thing is always eventually, I'm like, eventually these guys are gonna start killing each other at some point, eh?
Totally.
Like, it doesn't wind up happening, but I feel like you could have been headed in that direction.
Totally.
Anyway, so because of this, that's it. What we do see happens is this, basically their death, which is, they call it cycling, if I'm not mistaken. Like in the story, it's called cycling, and it looks horrible. And the older guy, they call him Grandpa Flick.
That's it, yeah.
He dies because, again, that's it. Like, he basically dies. Essentially, he dies of starvation.
Yeah.
And they go through, that's it. It's this process where basically like they cycle in.
Steamify.
And then they turn into steam, and then people eat them. Like, it's a whole, like, it's like you die and then your group cannibalizes you. It's fucked up.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like the visual that they have in the movie. Cause it's like, they're having like this moment, like this bedside
everyone's
moment,
crying.
And they're all like,
because he's dying.
And then like he dies, and then he starts to, turn into steam. And the second
they're all like,
happened, they all just
vultures. Like, they're like, I need it. So they go and they pick up that last little bit kind of thing. Yeah, it's weird, but you're right. It's true. It's like animals. Yeah. Basically. Totally. They're essentially like animals where it's like, oh, this member of our pride has died. Okay, well, I guess we got to eat him because we're in the savannah and we can't find any more food. So I guess we just have to eat each other now. Yeah. Like, that's basically what it is. So because of this, obviously Rose is on the search for someone with so much shine that they will be able to sustain themselves for years after this. But still, eventually it will run out. It's stupid.
Well, I guess her thought is like, if it sustains us for years, then that gives us a lot
more
of time
to find
someone else.
I know. And I mean, like, I know, like,
they do find like a few people.
They do,
in this movie.
They do. There is a really like horrible sequence in the film where they find this little boy played by Jacob Tremblay from Room and everything, and we've talked about him before. He's wonderful. He's great. Who's in like Iowa, I think, because this one isn't in one location. This is all over the states, all kinds of different areas. They find this little boy who is at a baseball game, like a Pee-wee baseball game, and you do hear there's two people speaking on the stands. One of them, I forget which one of the two men who's having a conversation. One of them is played by Danny Torrance from the original Shining movie in 1980, which is fun. They're having a conversation about how this kid is so gifted at baseball because it's like he always knows where the ball's going to go when it's thrown, and he never misses a hit. And you're like, okay, so he does have like an ability of some sort.
He just doesn't realize it himself.
He might not even know. Yeah. That's the thing, is that like, that's what you have to understand too, is that the story postulates that every person everywhere has a little bit of steam in them. You see it when the elderly people die in the hospice. You see there's a little bit that's expelled when they die, because everyone has a little bit, and that's like the universe that the story exists in. But some people have it just much more than others do. And it manifests itself in different ways. And I'm sure that is the case. And a lot of people who have it maybe just in a small to medium way don't know. Like, he might not even realize that he always can hear from whoever the pitcher is that they're going to throw the ball here. And like whatever kind of like throw that they're going to, I don't know, baseball.
Just think it's a talent of his.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So everyone's just like, wow, he's just so good. He's going to probably go to Major League Baseball. So we see him play a game. Crow Daddy's found him, and the rest of them follow shortly after. They kidnap him. And apparently there's more steam that comes out if this person's tortured while they're dying, which is really terrible.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, there's like this really horrible scene where they like tie him up and they like stab him a lot and stuff. It's really, you don't see it, but the implication is there. You get it. Like, it's not pleasant.
Yeah, like it's lengthy. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jacob Tremblay is such a good actor that he just does such a good job of this. Like, you believe it when it's happening. So we do see that happen. And when that's happening, again, because Abra has such strong abilities, she's a bazillion miles away in New Hampshire, and she wakes up at night because she can feel that it's happening, and she has such a strong reaction, of course, because she's feeling it as though it's happening to her, basically, and she's like, no, stop. She doesn't like it, and she like has a conniption in bed pretty much in the middle of the night, and when she screams, Rose hears it from all the way out where she is, where they've done this to this kid, and she blows the word red rum or murder into the blackboard wall at Dan's place. Like, he falls out of bed because it's like this giant psychic shock that he gets, where he falls out of bed and he looks and he sees it in the mirror. So it says red rum, and then he turns around and it says murder with the backwards R as well, which is a thing from The Shining.
Right.
Because it's Danny writing murder, but he's young, so he's like 5 years old, so he writes it backwards. Anyway, it's fine. Right, so because of this, they start to get they decide to, like, okay, she goes looking for Dan, even though they've never physically met, and they meet up with each other.
Abra. So, like, Abra is, like, the good one. Like, she has a very strong shine, but she also believes that she must do the right thing.
Yes.
And help people. And, like, so she has this whole, like, you know, experience, and then she goes and tries to figure out who this kid is, like, what happened.
Yeah, because she writes murder on the chalkboard.
Yeah.
She busts it into the chalkboard, and he's like, who? And she writes baseball boy under this, but she doesn't know his name.
She doesn't know his name. So she's trying to find out who he is and stuff. And then, you know, she shows up for Dan, because she's like, we have to do something, like, to help and stop this.
You know, he's managed to put a lot of his whole past trauma behind him to an extent, and overall make, like, a good, decent life for himself here. But I still think that he's repressing a lot of stuff. So he doesn't want to at first. He's like, no, like, I can't, you know.
But he's also, like, you know, based on everything that we've said, his character is not one that necessarily wants to help, you know. Like, he is so, like, disturbed himself from, like, his past traumas and stuff that it's like everything that he does, like, you know, his job, his life, that is just about as much as he can handle.
Yes, exactly.
Because anything other than that might, like, start, like, messing with his, like, boxes and his ghosts and, like, all this. So he's kind of always hanging by a very thin thread.
Yeah, we're 1 second from tipping over the edge of the cliff. So, of course, he's hesitant, but she wins him over eventually. And she's like, if you could I can direct you there. And if you can get to where he was, if you can find him, then at least his parents can bury him. Like, at least something. And she says the baseball mitt that he had, one of the True Knot, one of the guys was fiddling around with it and he had it on. So she's like, if you can get me that, I can figure out where they are. And we can stop them from doing what they're doing, because they're just killing people like us.
Right.
Dan at first is like, no. But eventually he's like, oh, fuck, fine. Because he also is one that gets won over with the idea of, like, doing the right thing, where, like, he doesn't want to, but it's kind of ingrained in there of, like, no, I do have to do this. And I do have to push against everything that I grew up with, you know? So he recruits Billy in the middle of the night and is like, I know it's going to sound insane. I need you to trust me. This is what we're going to go do. And Billy's the best fucking friend in the world. Okay. And he's like, all right, sure. So they go and drive off from New Hampshire to Iowa, which must be a long drive. Arrive at the place that she saw where the boy was killed. And are able to, based on her instructions, are able to dig up the body. And so then Billy's fully on board at that point, because he's okay, what the fuck? Like, there's no way that you would know this. Like, it's not possible. So, so he's fully on board at that point. They then decide to formulate a plan. They go to visit Abra, who has kind of explained certain things about this to her dad, sort of, but she hasn't really told him everything. So, of course, when Dan first gets there, he tries to beat the shit out of him because he's like, you're a big, gross pervert. Like, you're like a grown-ass man, and she's 13. But then she uses her abilities to show her dad flashes of what's gone on, kind of thing, because he's like trying to beat Dan up, and Dan's like, I thought you showed him. And she's like, I told him. And he's like, that's not the same thing. So once she does show him, he goes to get a stiff drink, which I don't blame him for at all, because she essentially just showed him like an 11-year-old boy being murdered. So
also she showed him
use psychic flashes to do this.
So that in itself requires a drink.
So they come up with a plan where she uses basically like an astral projection of herself, and they lure the True Knot out into the woods, basically, because Rose has been, ever since Rose felt her, she's been looking for her, because she's like, this person has so much steam that we will be sustained for decades, basically. So she wants to kill her. And I love that there's this thing where Crow Daddy's like, well, do we kill her or do we turn her? And of course, Rose does not want that kind of competition. So she's like, oh, no, we're going to kill her. We need the steam from her. And you're like, okay. So they've been kind of mentally volleying back and forth where like Abra's been jumping into her mind to try to find her. She's been doing the same thing to get to Abra. They've been basically engaging in like some sort of magical psychological battle with one another.
It's pretty cool.
Like a telepathic battle. The visuals are fucking stunning. Awesome. Anyway, they look very cool.
Rose gets injured in this.
Yeah, she's
injures her pride
like
more
a
than
hand
anything.
degloving. It's gross. Mike Flanagan really likes to mangle hands. That one in Gerald's Game is not pleasant at all. It's gross. So anyway, they've been doing this, and because of this, they kind of each knows where the other one is. So they lure the True Knot minus Rose. She's like staying back. They lure the True Knot out to a kind of secluded area in the woods, and when they arrive, they try to take her, but she's not actually there. She's astral projected herself. She's in her kitchen at home. And then there's basically a gunfight that breaks out because Dan and Billy, start shooting at them. Fire is returned. There's a lot of back and forth. Pretty much every member of the True Knot, save Rose, basically, and Crow Daddy, are killed. And except when we get to the last one, Andy is the last one to go.
The snakebite girl.
Yeah, and she is shot a couple of times when she's about to kill Dan. Billy shoots her. But right before she dies, she's able to do one last push, and she tells Billy, kill yourself, and he does immediately. He shoots himself in the head, which sucks so much. I felt really bad.
Yeah, best character.
And unfortunately, also then we're seeing the astral projection of Abra is like, where's the Crow Daddy? He's not here. Yeah. And then she gets all the way back at home. She gets a prick in the neck because he knew what was going on, and he followed and made sure that she was at home. So he takes her from home. He's killed her dad, which is also fucked up.
The fact that he knew basically what was going on, let her kill everybody in their group.
I know.
You can only assume that this was like a discussion between him and Rose the Hat, because he doesn't do
they didn't talk to the others about this
without Rose, but like they decided it together, which is why Rose wasn't there in the first place. Yeah. And you're like, wow, so you let that whole group die.
Like 7 or 8 people.
And you're like, I guess you've decided that just getting this one girl is worth
that much more important. Yeah, I know. That's it. Because it's
everyone.
interesting, too, because they're all very connected to each other, because Rose has, quite the reaction when they're killed. It hurts her physically when they're killed. And I think it's because they're all connected by the things that they're doing and how they're sharing the steam and everything. So I think she feels it when it happens. But yeah, Crow Daddy abducts Abra, murders her father. Thank God her mom is away. We saw there was a scene earlier where she was leaving because her grandmother's sick, so she went to another state to visit her.
Yeah.
So luckily she still has one parent, because I was like, wow, okay. So he takes off with her. Dan decides to fully embrace his shine again, basically, and is able to, project himself into the car that she's in, and then she allows him, into her body.
Right.
Basically, again, all the rules around The Shining are very vague, because I think for plot purposes, it's just whatever is easiest for us.
It's good to advance the plot. That's sure,
that's it. So he does that, and then in using both of them that way, he's able to crash the car. Crow Daddy is killed when he does that, and then he and Dan and Abra meet back up, and they're like, Rose is going to keep coming because now she's going to be fucking pissed. And so we need to take her somewhere where there will be something else to stop her. And so his solution is to go back to the Overlook Hotel, because all of the entities that exist there are something that, he's like, presumably if they'll go after us, they will go after her as well.
Yep.
Because she's also very strong. So that's exactly what they do. They drive up there. She follows them. He, quote unquote, wakes the hotel back up, because simply him walking in, the power turns back on. Which is interesting.
Is the hotel a ghost?
Yes, kind of it is. It's like the hotel in and of itself.
Be.
And the whole thing is its own metaphor for darkness and trauma and addiction.
Well,
and
it's he's haunted by this hotel, right?
And his own past,
the hotel itself has a life force. And so him going back, it's reacting to him.
Yep, exactly. This is definitely this latter third of the film is probably where you see the most that it's a Shining sequel, because really until then it's almost like it's its own separate thing.
Aside from at the beginning where you see kind of
the flashbacks and stuff. Yes, agreed, for sure. And then the whole other bits.
Yeah, it's like a whole other movie, and then they're like,
you come back. Remember when we were a Shining sequel? But we're going to do that again. And you're like, oh, right.
Yeah, that's what this is about. Yeah.
So they go back into the hotel. Rose arrives, and initially like outmatches Dan, at least to an extent, but then he opens all of his mind boxes and lets out all of those overlooked ghosts that she's just like, what, are you gonna do it? He's like, no. And she's like, what the hell is in your head? Because she goes in there, and he's like, yeah, they're in here and they're starving.
Yeah.
So that's how her character is killed, because all of the ghosts show up and they all basically consume her together. And when they start going back after Dan, they don't consume him, but they do possess him for a period of time. So you get a lot of, again, Shining references, him hobbling around with an axe trying to kill Abra, very reminiscent. Jack Torrance does that in the original film, hobbling after Danny. So it's very much like along the same lines. He's able to get rid of them and fight it off for a period of time, but he's also like, I need to get rid of this hotel once and for all. Like, I need to end this. So he sends her outside and he goes to the boiler room and basically sets the entire place on fire. But he doesn't leave in the end, which I think is... I think he had accepted that by the time he left to go to the boiler room. I think he knew. He was like, I'm not leaving. Because also like the ghosts may follow him and stuff. And I think he was like, no, I'm not leaving.
I think he was just tired
also,
as well. Like he kind of held these ghosts in his mind for so long, and it took up so much of his energy to do that once he like let them out to kill Rose, it's like, how would he get them back?
Yeah, that's it. No, it's just...
and I think he's just tired.
It would be too much of an undertaking, exactly. Yeah. So he does die with the hotel. Then we skip forward to a little while later. Abra is back at home. She's speaking to Dan as a ghost.
Yes, that's right.
And he... sort of goes back to his initial conversations with her when he, at the time, told her, like, not to use her shine, that she should dampen it, that she should keep it close to the chest and hidden so that no one would come after her and she wouldn't be in danger. But he's like, I was wrong to think that. Yes, there might be other people in the world we don't know, but I think that you should keep shining. I think that you should keep using your abilities the way that you have been using them. And so she has like a nice moment with her mom at the end where she tells her that, like, she's like, I was, because at first her mom comes into her room and she's like, who are you talking to? And she's like, no one. But then she follows her into the kitchen. She's like, no, sorry, that's not true. I was talking to Dan. She said, he's fine. And then she says, Daddy's fine too, which I thought was nice. And she has like they have like a little like denouement kind of moment, sort of, which I could have been corny, but I feel like it's well written enough that you're like, you know, like that's nice kind of thing. And that's kind of how they like wrap up the entire film. Yeah. It's so good. There are so many like little things, like we've been talking for a while, but there are so many little things here and there, like little moments of dialogue, character reactions to things, like all these little things, whether it's the script, whether it's performances, whether it's the score, the visual aspect of things. It's really just like a really solid, really great film to watch.
Definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, that's it. Everyone does a fantastic job. I didn't even mention that Rose the Hat is played by Rebecca Ferguson.
Yeah.
She's fucking fantastic. I think everybody's getting a pretty good idea of that now, because like she was just in like the more recent Mission Impossible movies. She was in Silo last year, which got like a lot of attention on Apple TV and is still happening. So she's having like a lot of stuff. She has, but I feel like she's having a really good moment these last couple of years. So hopefully that'll continue, because she's very talented. So it's nice to see, all of that. I loved the little girl who played Abra. Kylie Curran is really good. Yes. Ewan McGregor is one of those actors that I find is really underrated. He's in so much stuff, but no one ever talks about him. And it's weird.
I know. It's like, he's kind of like almost, I don't want to say taken for granted, but it's like he's one of those actors who's like, you see him in so many things, and he does such a phenomenal job in anything that he's in. And he's got this like comforting presence about him.
And there's something, Ewan McGregor has one of the nicest smiles I've ever seen in my entire life.
And
really.
Like genuine smiles. Really. And like, like I say, just very like comforting and stuff. And I just think he's just like taken advantage of, or just like, I don't know, like
glossed over. People forget about him, and I just don't know why that is.
I don't know what that's about. Yeah,
me neither. I don't get it, but no, it's a really great film. I am very grateful that we're kind of in this time where Mike Flanagan gets to adapt every piece of literature that he wants to, and I hope that he keeps doing that for a very long time. His original films are also very good, but his adaptations are great.
Yeah,
and I'm really excited to kind of see like how all of that develops, in the next like decade. Who knows what else he'll be able to do, right?
Totally.
So Yeah. So have you guys seen Dr. Sleep? Have you read the book? My understanding is it's until the latter third, it's a pretty faithful adaptation. So I'd be curious to hear like what people's takes are. Do you prefer certain things about the book, about the movie, whatever it is? You can let us know about that over on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at FullyBookedCA. And you can also hit up our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/bookwaswaybetter. We've been talking for a really long time. So until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.